This is Bonjour Chai, the Boy Who Cried Wolf edition. I'm Avi Feingold in Montreal, and I'm here with Alana Zakon in Montreal, and David Sklar in Calgary. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we talk about the latest hate crime report from Statistics Canada. Do they tell the whole story? We talk to former cop Mark Mendelson to find out, and David has a conversation with actor Jake Epstein. But first, Alana, David, how you guys doing?
Great.
Well,
living my
Alana,
best Mile End life. Can we always just talk at the same time? Is that our thing now?
It's totally
I was going to
cool.
throw it to you.
Alana, for those of us who are not Montrealers, what's the Mile End?
It's a mix between chassids and hipsters, which is a really interesting, unique blend that I happen to quite like. The area has a lot of character. There's a lot of classic Montreal walk-ups and some old spots. My grandparents grew up in this neighborhood. When my grandfather comes to visit, because I used to live in this neighborhood, he used to point out, like, oh, do you see that Pharmaprix? It was actually a movie theater. And then you look, and there's, like, this engraved, interesting, like, lion. And it's like, ooh, that could have been, like, a fancy movie theater. So there's a lot of history.
My grandmother has a very similar story about the Mile End, except she points it out and she says, see that bookstore across from the church? We used to have a store there. And that church used to always say, do not shop because the Jews run that shop. Do not go there, everybody. So it's a pretty similar kind of history, I think, about grandparents in the Mile End.
Did she report that as a hate crime?
You know what? Even if she did back then, I don't think any police would have cared.
So my story that is very similar to that is when we moved back. So at the time, I guess my daughter was like 3 or 4, my oldest, and we're going through this neighborhood, and just so they can see, we're going with my dad and walking around, and I stop at this building at the corner of Park and Laurier. For those of you who are in Montreal and want to get a sense of where it's going, and I point at the balcony at the top floor of that building. It's a 4-story building, and I say, "You see that balcony?" And she goes, "Yeah." I said, "That's where Zadie grew up." And she goes, "Oh wow, Zadie was so lucky." I was like, "Why was Zadie so lucky?" She says, "Because he got to have Starbucks every morning."
That's hilarious.
Because there's a Starbucks on the ground floor there now.
Nothing ever changes.
So. Yeah, that's the Mile End. It's chassids and hipsters, and exactly. Do you guys know any chassids who are hipsters or vice versa?
I've seen chassids on bicycles in this area.
I met my first one over the summer when I was in Montreal. I took a photo of him.
There was a blog for a while called Chassid or Hipster, and I had friends that were like qualified as both.
I've never met a chassid hipster, but I would love to meet one. That sounds like a good time. They don't really, like, to be honest, I walk in the street and I don't think people know I'm Jewish. Like, it's like, Friday, and I'd be like, oh, have a good Shabbos, and they probably won't look me in the eye. So it's not really, like, the best area for me to find community, let's just say.
I have a friend who is a slam poet, and he's got, like, big, long payas and a big beard, and he works for Google, and he's into punk music. So I guess he totally qualifies as a chassid who is a hipster.
Do hipsters work for Google? Is that hipster enough?
Maybe. I don't know. Depends which department, maybe.
I thought Google was supposed to be anti-Semitic now after they had their whole hate on for the Jews lately.
Everything is anti-Semitic. Do you ever try to type in Nazi into Google? Right, it shows you websites of Nazis. Like, it's so anti-Semitic.
I actually have to think about this topic a lot because of my play, which is about anti-Semitism. And actually, it talks about a lot of themes that we've talked about on this show, in the sense of, like, how far...
Can you tell us a bit about the play? Like, you're in town for this rehearsal.
Yeah, I can tell you a bit about the play. So I play Isabel, who is a Jewish bride, and she's marrying a non-Jew, much to the dismay of her family. But he's trying really hard to fit in and win points with the in-laws, and they do the breaking the glass, and then he falls on it and ends up in the hospital. And that's kind of how the play starts. It's a dark comedy, and it goes through a lot of themes about anti-Semitism and how far is too far, because there's this whole kerfuffle that happens with a friend who was at the wedding, his best man, who makes a salute that the people in the crowd seem to think was a Nazi salute. Was it a Nazi salute? Was it not? You'll have to come find out if you come see the show. But there's a lot of conversations about, similar themes to what we've talked about on the show about political correctness and are we getting too alarmed? Are we not? And all the emotions that come with weddings and anti-Semitism and friendship.
Whoa.
There's a lot going on.
Is this play called Heil Hitler or something? That's what it sounds like.
You sound like the anti-Semitic
No,
guy in
please.
the show.
Avi lives for his puns.
It's called Mazel Tov, and it's playing at Infinite Theater. That's the theater company that's putting it on, and the actual show takes place at the Kin Experience, which is close to Place des Arts. And we could link it in the show notes because we actually have a special promo for Bonjour Chai listeners. Avi, do you want to tell us about it?
We do. So they reached out to us. They found out that Alana is on the show, and they're like, if all the people from Bonjour Chai, not all, anybody who wants to come from Bonjour Chai wants to come and check out Alana Zakon in her, I was going to say her Montreal theater premiere, but her Montreal post-pandemic theater debut. The first time she is on the boards in Montreal since before the pandemic. Come check her out at Kin Experience. It's going to be on May 3rd. We have a special promo code for the Tuesday, May 3rd performance. It'll be $10 off. It's a $20 ticket instead of a $30 ticket. And you just have to use promo code CHAI-PROMO when you book the ticket on the website. We will put the link to the ticketing website to the Eventbrite on the show page, in the show notes, I should say, and you can just go to Infinite Theater also to check it out. But the promo code is CHAI-PROMO for Tuesday, May 3rd performance, and hopefully we'll get a bunch of Bonjour Chai listeners to come check out Alana Zakon. I don't know, should we like offer a bonus thing? Like maybe the first drink is on us at the post-show, like beverage drinking sort of we'll have an impromptu talk back.
Maybe on you. I have to perform again the next day.
You're not even going to come join the Bonjour Chai.
There's a lot of actors who are like,
Can I join virtually?
we will have some talkbacks. I don't know on which dates. I have a lot of actor friends who are like, every night you go out after the show and you have a drink, and then I'm like, I want to have a brain for performing this many shows. But once the run's over, or if I have a day off, then sure.
We're going to convince Alana to come have a drink with us on Tuesday, May 3rd for her performance of Mazel Tov at Infinite Theater. I do want to call out also from our shows in the past couple of weeks, we've been getting people writing in about their Canadian-born Canadian rabbis. And I think it's so heartening. This is not my nachas, but I'm getting such nachas. But I will call out at least one rabbi from the people that I've been getting messages from. Rachel Levitsky reached out to me, and she said that she wanted to shout out her rabbi, Bill Tepper, who is a family friend, who is a rabbi now in Kingston, Ontario. And she says, I think you guys would like him as he has taught drama and directed community theater. He is hard of hearing, but that hasn't stopped him from doing the work he loves. So Rabbi Bill Tepper, our hats are tipped off to you, and you keep doing what you do, and Yasher Koach for your great service to the Canadian Jewish community.
I'd love to meet this Rabbi Bill.
You know, it's really interesting to see hard of hearing people that are actors or in the theater performance world or in the movie performance world after this Sunday night's surprise win. From what I understand, I'm not a big follower of the Oscars, but Coda won this year for Best Picture, and it involves a lot of hard of hearing actors. Have you guys seen it? What's your...
I have not seen it yet.
No, I haven't seen it either, but I will soon, okay. Definitely, I promise.
Done. Are you like? Have you guys ever worked with a hard of hearing actor? How does that like? Is that interesting? I don't know.
I have not, but there is a theater company in Vancouver. I'd have to look up the name, but they work with all actors with disabilities, and that's kind of like the mandate of the company. So there's certainly a lot of talk out there in BC about making theater accessible for people of all different kind of backgrounds and abilities.
I think there's even a theater in Tel Aviv that works with hard of hearing, deaf and blind actors as well too. When I was there, I walked by it. I didn't see a performance there, but in Calgary as well too, there's something called Inside Out Theater, and they work primarily with actors with disabilities. So I think it's wonderful. I think we need more representation in that field.
Are you guys Oscars people at all? Do you generally watch? Did you watch this week? What was like?
I'm so sad I missed it. I saw all the memes post when they were just blowing up all over social media, obviously with Will and Chris Rock.
Oh,
but
yes.
Now that I don't have that thing that we're all talking about. But the thing is, it's like now that I don't have cable anymore, I don't watch the Oscars, and it feels like it's a big shindig for Nothing that I'm super interested in. I think you're nodding along, Alana. You feel the same way.
Well, I was actually nodding along at the cable thing because I think when I was younger, it was like, oh, just turn the TV on. It's on this channel. You watch it. We used to actually put out red towels and make like a red carpet when we were kids. And my bat mitzvah was
God.
California themed, and we had.
Did
this,
you walk down
giant...
with your cow with the cow dress and have the red carpet?
I don't think that cow costume existed at that point. That was when I was like 3 years old. But at my bat mitzvah, it was Hollywood themed, and we had this like cardboard cutout Academy Award, and so that was like a later addition to the red towels. Was like this giant Academy Award made out of like cardboard, and we would make like fake cocktails that were non-alcoholic. Like it was really fun as a kid. I feel like I've watched the Oscars like once since I became
mocktails. You mean?
Mocktails, yeah. I did actually see a good number of the nominated films this year, but I just got to town. I had a bridal shower on Sunday. There was just a lot going on, and I was starting rehearsals the next day, so I didn't prioritize watching the Oscars.
I never, rarely, if ever, I can't remember the last time I tuned into the Oscars, and I don't know why. I just was like, hey, let's check it out tonight. And I started watching, and my wife was sort of like watching from the side. She was just reading, and all of a sudden I was like, wait, did that happen? And I was like, not expecting, like something it was so like, and I wasn't this like avid like Oscar watcher. So I didn't know, like, is this a thing? What was going on here? And I had like the worst take ever by the time it was done. I have to say, maybe you guys can help me. I'm throwing actors under the bus, and maybe please help me. Please help your profession and defend it. Because this is a bad take, and I feel like it's a bad take, but I need to figure out how to make it better or how to like redeem it, or just please tell me that this is the worst thing that I should say. Like my initial reaction to Will Smith's speech was, I don't know if I trust somebody whose job it is to cry on cue, like in front of a camera, and that's all he does in the pivotal moments of like all of his big movies is he just starts weeping and, you know, like breaking down and getting you to feel emotional for him. And even forgetting about the content of his speech, I was like, like, I think that if I was an actor and I could do this, that would probably be the one thing that I could do to redeem what I just did in front of, you know, a million people.
So I hear that you've chosen, you're on team Chris Rock is what you're saying right now, Abby.
No,
I'm
not even taking a side of which team on anything on this one, although sometimes you should be able to take a joke, but that is beside the point of anything that I'm trying to say here. I'm not saying rights or wrongs. I'm just saying in this case, there's a bit of wrong here that I just couldn't understand how to... Is this a bad, like, why is this a bad take? How is this a bad take? Because I feel it is, but I can't quite justify. Actors, tell me why I'm being such an idiot.
I haven't actually seen the speech. All I know is the vague details of what happened that made him slap him. But I will say that I've definitely used my acting chops to get out of situations. Like I once got pulled over by a cop for going through a red light, and I started crying, and it got me out of the ticket. So,
see,
you know,
I'm right.
In that sense, I don't think that's such a wrong take. But I didn't see this speech, and I can't really give an opinion about it.
Because I had somebody who was a non-actor come up to me and say, how could you say that? You don't even understand the role, like what acting is. It's not about instantly getting into a role, and it's not about just like fake crying whenever you want. Is this real? And he had emotion there. Whoa.
You know, I might have said, Alana, oh, you probably got out of the ticket because you were a girl and you were crying and he just felt awkward. But to be fair, I have cried to get out of a ticket from a police officer too, and it worked.
And we're talking, this is actor crying, like fake crying. This is not like real.
Avi, the thing you need to know is actor crying is real crying. We're not lying.
Of course, but this is
we're
like
coming from the truth of our feelings and emotion, but we're just putting it out there as opposed to bottling it all
Joey
up.
Tribbiani with the hands in the pants, like pulling out like, you know, a hair or two, and that's how you don't remember that Friends episode? Where he was like trying to coach somebody about crying, and he was like, that's what I do. I just get my hand, start pulling out a little hair or 2 or 3, and then he starts crying. And anyways, yeah, but yes, I know it's real crying, but it's not about you're not crying about the thing that you're crying about.
All very possible. I cannot even delve into his mind or what he was going through before, during, or after itself. Those two could have been very, very real tears, and he could have had a very emotional night. But You're right. It could have come from an acting perspective. I tend not to believe that because then it feels more forced. And if you watch it, you could believe that he is actually being emotional, and he might just feel regret for what he just did too.
Is there anything Jewish that we can talk about around the Oscars? Like, we're just like, what is this discussion?
I was about to ask, do Jewish actors fake cry on like Tisha B'Av also?
No. No.
Because no.
Well,
if they're not feeling it, but they're in shul and they want to show how much they're meaningful, and like
that would be pretty messed up. I would go with no.
I'll bring up my Jewish version at my nachas at the end of the segment.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't find the Oscars to be so Jewy this year. But again, I don't watch the Oscars that much, so maybe it's not. Oscars so goyish, but is that every year? I think,
don't the Jews run Hollywood? Isn't that what people have been saying all along?
And that's a wrap.
Let's save that one for our discussion about the Hollywood, the Oscars Museum, or maybe our non-discussion about that. But I think that's all we'll say about that.
Today's episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Atelier Lou Bijouterie in Montreal, Quebec. Atelier Lou specializes in watches and custom-designed jewelry along with a curated selection of designer jewelry. Visit us online or in person, and Eric Goldberg will help make your jewelry dreams come true. Atelier Lou is offering a promo code for all Bonjour Chai listeners using BON18 at checkout for 10% off your order at atelierlou.com.
2 weeks ago, Statistics Canada released their annual report on police-reported hate crimes. And to quote the headline from the CJN, the Jewish community continues to be the most targeted religious group for hate crimes. With us to talk about this is Mark Mendelson, a former Toronto police homicide detective and currently a private investigator and crime expert for Bell Media. Mark, welcome to Bonjour Chai.
Hi, and thanks for having me.
So, Mark, in case you thought I was talking about an old story in my intro there, let me be clear and quote some more CJN headlines. February 28th, 2020, Jews still the most targeted group for hate-motivated crimes. November 30th, 2018, Canadian Jews experienced a spike in hate crimes in 2017. November 2019, 2017, Jews were the most targeted victims of hate crimes in 2016, StatsCan. And yet even more headlines for the Toronto edition. March 21st, 2016, Jews most targeted group in hate crimes, Toronto Police. March 20th, 2017, Jews single most targeted group, Toronto Hate Crimes Report. April 20th, 2018, Jews again head the list of groups targeted by hate crimes in Toronto. And May 15th, 2019, Jews the most targeted group for hate crimes in Toronto. So the standard response every year to these types of reports is that anti-Semitism is rampant and that the Jewish community must remain ever vigilant and report all hate crimes. But here's my theory, Mark, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I think that there are actually way more hate crimes against all other minorities, and it's just that other minority groups are either too afraid to go to the police and report every single crime, or it's more difficult to conclusively rule that something was a hate crime when there isn't, a swastika or something to rely on. And on top of all that, other minority groups don't have the same internal media or organizations breathlessly reporting on StatsCan reports and how everybody hates them. So in other words, I think that either Jews are over-reporting every possible incident because they are told that it's the right thing to do, or other minorities are under-reporting them for a variety of reasons, or some combination of the two. Right? Can you help us untangle all of this?
I'm going to go with a combination of the two, and I certainly agree with most of what you had just said there. It's certainly been my experience that, there's probably another 75% that never got reported because people didn't realize it was a hate crime, or they just didn't want to be bothered doing it. They didn't want to be a witness, just like it's so difficult to get witnesses in other crimes as well. So it's certainly underreported. That said, it's clear that the Jewish community in Canada is very organized. They don't always have to call the police. They can call Congress. They can call B'nai B'rith. There's all kinds of places that they call where they can get information and guidance moving forward. And of course, there's a hate crime unit in Toronto as well with Toronto Police, not the same in other parts of the country. But we're certainly a lot more organized than other communities may be, and maybe that's why these numbers are high. I think that the rate of uh, hate crime directed towards, say, the Asian community, certainly in Toronto and maybe on the West Coast, is also high. A lot of that comes from spin-off from COVID conspiracy theories, all kinds of things. Those things are not being reported as well. But we have always been an organized community right across this country for decades, and I think that helps. The Jewish communities in all the cities in Canada to at least be able to reach out and get some advice and some guidance as to what steps to take next. Was it a crime? Is it a one-off incident? Was it a shouting match involving a Hasidic Jew on the street or whatever? Did that make it a crime? Maybe yes, maybe no. But yeah, we certainly are covered, and the numbers do not reflect, I think, what really takes place in life.
Can you then explain how a hate crime is defined in Canada?
It's hard to explain. There are hate propaganda laws within Canada, which basically, if you're advocating for the genocide or for bodily harm directed towards an identifiable group, quote unquote, and that requires the Attorney General's consent in Canada to at least lay that charge. Hate crimes are any crime where one's religion or ethnicity, or the color of their skin, or their sexual preferences, identities, what have you, are an aggravating factor to the crime itself. And then the courts view that as a hate crime. It is a very mitigating factor when it comes time to sentencing at the end of the day. There are just so many ways to get to that place. That the police have to make that determination when they take the occurrence, and then eventually the Crown will make that determination when it comes to prosecuting as to whether the hate motivation behind it is an aggravating or mitigating factor.
So, we were talking a bit about, and I want to follow up on this a little bit more. There was an article that I read on byblacks.com. I initially went on there because I was like, well, what do other minority groups do when it comes to hate crime reporting? And they are not reporting nearly as much. So the echo chamber of what's going on in other minority medias and other communities doesn't seem to be there. But I found this article by this woman, Tanya Walker. She's a lawyer, and she's pointing out that there is difficulty in pinpointing what hate crimes are, right? If there's protests about a ban on Islam outside a mosque, right? And people aren't arrested, is that a hate crime, right? The difficulties in showing motive, right? That, the way she says, the main reason is we can never be certain about what's going on in a perpetrator's head or narrow down their motivations to a single cause. Some motives, such as spray painting a swastika in a temple, are obvious. Others, such as vandalizing a vehicle that belongs to a Muslim family, are not as obvious. And I find that, there's something that really resonates with me in that anytime something even remotely small happens, we are reporting that and we're automatically assuming that it's a hate crime. And clearly there are many other communities where the lines are much more amorphous and those communities are not, reporting everything that's going on. So, first of all, is that true? Are there people that are underreporting? Are there other communities where a lot of stuff is happening, but they're either too afraid or they're too, they're not, there's no clear way of defining this as a hate crime, even though it may have actually been, because there's no clear symbol like a swastika being put out there?
Well, I think that the initial determination is made by the investigating officer at the scene, the uniform officer that takes the report. They speak to witnesses, they speak to the complainant, they speak to their supervisors, and an initial determination is made whether hate was a motivator for the incident itself. I mean, if there's a car accident between, an Orthodox Jew and somebody who's not, and there's an argument about the car accident, that doesn't take you to a hate crime. Okay, but if certain things are said, suggested, comments made, with respect to how the accident happened or why somebody was assaulted, that changes the motivation and that changes the course of the investigation as well. For a lot of communities, for example, you look at the Afghan community and you look at the Chinese community where we're looking at first generation, or South American, where the mistrust for the police is horrendous. Okay, they don't view the police as a friend, as an ally, as we do in North America, just by the mere fact that through our own life experiences. So they don't have the trust of the police. So they will not go to the police. They may go to their imam, they may go to their mosque to whatever place of worship and have conversations about it and may be encouraged to report it to the police. But at the end of the day, if there is that inherent mistrust, they won't go, and therefore that doesn't get reported.
You talked about, police the first police officer who comes to the scene itself. What type of training do these police officers have? Is it everyone who gets a background in, I understand what I need to look for a hate crime at all? Or is it this sort of, it just really depends on this particular officer's background at the time?
Well, I think most police forces in Canada, certainly at the police college stage, get training in hate propaganda, in hate literature, and racially motivated crimes. Does that make them an expert? Absolutely not. Do most investigators and detectives in police forces in Canada come across these types of offenses on a regular basis? Absolutely not. So it's always a learning curve, and that's why they reach out to resources. I can take you back to the early 80s, when I went into what was essentially the first hate literature, neo-Nazi white propaganda investigative unit in the country, and I was the first member. And we dealt with people like Ernst Zundel. And I think back, and cops had no idea who Ernst Zundel was. They did not know. The public didn't know. Granted, there wasn't the internet. And then as that whole investigation unfolded, and we ended up taking him to court, and that's a whole other podcast and a whole other story as to how we got there. I remember police officers saying to me at the courthouse at the time, "Why do we have all these cops here? I don't understand. There's one guy charged with this offense, and we don't see this ever." And then, of course, when they see the reaction of the public towards Ernst Zundel, and they see the emotions come out from survivors that came to court, and just to sit in the courtroom and watch and things of that nature, that's the learning experience that people get. And it's an ongoing educational process. And I mean, if you're an RCMP officer in Northern Alberta, you're going to know nothing about anti-Semitism. Let's face it. You're just not going to. You never experience it. But if you're a cop in Vancouver or Toronto or Montreal, you're going to be exposed to it. But there are resources out there. There are resources available to officers where they can make inquiries. And of course, Crown attorneys and assistant Crown attorneys are also trained in this as well. And so are judges, for that matter, because it's important for them to understand it's not just a punch in the face that somebody may have received in an assault. There's a whole melange of hate that goes into that in terms of the motivation and how people react to it and how they recover from it, that everybody has to be sensitive to.
I'm thinking about this right now, and it never occurred to me, how does a white nationalist hate crime get classified? Is it anti-Semitic or something else? Because the more I stop to think about it, the white nationalism and especially using symbols that are Nazi symbols that have that history is a whole melange of hatred in and of itself. And yet there's probably some desire to pinpoint it because a swastika is going to be an anti-Jewish symbol. But that person is committing a hate crime against gays, against black people, against any other form of immigration. And yet the pinpointing of that, because it uses a specific symbol, is going to go in one bucket and not in another.
And it may not go contrary to the criminal code either.
For sure. But I'm saying if something like that were to go, and be classified as a hate crime, it feels and again, I'm yet another place where I'm trying to reduce the level of stats here, and just to try to get a bit of context, we automatically see a swastika, maybe not when it's painted on a synagogue, when it is, that's obviously an anti-Jewish sentiment, but a swastika can mean any number of things, and yet we automatically assume that it's an anti-Jewish symbol.
Well, that's very true. That's where we go, and if we go back to the synagogue, of course, spray painting that synagogue, that's the criminal offense of mischief. And then, of course, based on that and based on the evidence that's available there,
then it becomes a hate crime.
Then it becomes a hate crime, and it becomes an aggravating factor later on down the road. But you're right. Somebody driving down the street waving a Nazi flag out of their passenger window. Is it offensive? Is it horrible? Do we want to see it? Absolutely not. Do we know what it means to the Jewish community? Yes. But do we always know what it means to all the other communities who may be offended by it? It's still worthy of an occurrence in terms of the police. Because don't forget, the police, they are proactive and they are reactive. And by being proactive, that's an intelligence-driven type of police organization as well. They're always collecting intelligence. Who had that Nazi flag? Had they been involved in anything else before? Has their name come up in any other investigations regarding anti-Semitic activity? All of that's intelligence-based information of investigative value. So it's important to report those things as well. And the cop will take the report. Will anything happen because of it? Maybe not. Maybe there'll be a door knock on the registered owner's door to find out why he was doing it. And explaining to them, maybe turn it into an educational moment. I don't know. But at the end of the day, it should be reported because it may lead to other investigative avenues later on down the road.
Are there moments when things shouldn't be reported? Meaning, like, if something is so minor that, maybe it's better not to waste, police resources and your time and energy to go and report something if it may not, be qualified as a crime, let alone a hate crime in any way, shape, or form? Or is it anything, if you think that it's something, you should automatically report it? I'm thinking of an example, right? A few years ago, there was snowfall in Montreal overnight, and somebody woke up in the morning and there was a swastika painted with, not being painted, just cut out of the snow with a finger on somebody's car, right? Is that something where you go and say that's a hate crime? Or let me be honest, it's not even requiring cleanup. I just have to move my windshield wipers and it's gone. And it may have just been a 15-year-old, that doesn't even know what this means and just going around painting symbols with their fingers or just, drawing things out. And at the end of the day, that might not be a hate crime, and yet it makes the morning news.
It makes the morning news because it's shocking to everybody that people would allow their minds to go to that place to do that. If you called the police, no, they probably wouldn't come. But your complaint will be recorded somewhere along the way within their databases as well. So if 75 people in a 9-block radius are reporting swastikas all over the place, maybe it's a different story. I think you got to pick your battles, and you have to decide. But you don't always have to just report it to the police. You can report it to your local synagogue, and they have avenues certainly in Canada to report it to organizations within this country representing the Jewish community, and they would want to know about that as well. So not everything is reportable, but you sort of got to pick and choose your battles.
You also talked about how things have changed dramatically in the 80s and 90s here. I'm just trying to think about the social media landscape the way it is now. It feels like anti-Semitism has increased dramatically. And anytime something happens in Israel, Jews will get the brunt of it in North America itself. So I'm just wondering, how has this evolved? How has this changed with Instagram, with Facebook, with all other forms of social media?
Well, let me take you back to the 80s again, when we ended up with Ernst Zundel on our plates. And I had been to Zundel's home a number of times, as he often referred to it as the bunker on Carlton Street. And I'd been there. And at that time, let's remember, Zundel was communicating with his followers and those people that espoused his views by mail. He was mailing out VHS tapes. He was mailing out cassette tapes. He was mailing out flyers, things of that nature. People had to reach out to him in order to receive this material from all over the world. Now, with the push of a button, you can reach millions of people. And it's changed. And who doesn't have access to the internet? Who doesn't have a smartphone now? So, if Zundel were in today's world, he would be reaching literally millions of people a day with his literature and his disinformation and his Holocaust denial and misinformation. His trial would have been covered very differently than it was back in the 80s. And same with Keekstra. We helped out the RCMP with the Keekstra prosecution in Alberta as well. Things have changed. And back then people had to reach out to these white supremacists and neo-Nazis to be part of that group. Now you can follow them on Instagram. You can follow them on all kinds of different sites that we don't even bother looking at in the dark web, where people will fuel the things that you think you believe, and you'll find answers to questions that you won't get from mainstream media and you won't get from talking to your neighbors and friends, but they will solidify those thoughts in your own mind, and all of a sudden you think everything's a big conspiracy. So it's a very different world now. So nowadays, when a swastika ends up painted at a synagogue or on somebody's car, it's out there. It's reaching hundreds of thousands of people as soon as somebody posts that on social media, and it's retweeted and resent. So everything has changed, and we're all very much aware of these events as they take place now, whereas in the 80s, we weren't.
So, but then what is happening? What is the difference between someone saying something online and then a physical assault happening? How do we differentiate the two? And maybe this is part of a larger question in terms of how hate crime is defined. Should we all be treating hate crime as the same if someone is saying something online to an actual assault down the road?
Well, I guess it depends on what they're saying. If they're breaching any sections of the criminal code, when that could be threatening, that could be criminal harassment, it could be advocating the genocide of a particular people or religion or racial minority. Then all of a sudden you're getting into that whole hate crime area in the criminal code through an online expression.
Sure, but I think to refine what David is getting at is that, there's a difference between a hate crime that's actually, all of it is bad, right? But a hate crime that is, verbal and words, whether posted or done in person, versus an assault against, an Asian individual or an LGBTQ individual, which is far more likely to happen than an actual assault that is anti-Semitic in nature, right? Should we be separating those two out and pointing out to the community, well, you know what, we do lead the charge, we lead the pack on anti-Semitic, on hate crimes overall, but let's be honest, they're pale in comparison to the amount of people that get assaulted that are Asian and or gay or anything like that, and that there should be some sort of distinction around that.
Well, I think there is a distinction. If you're assaulted, you're assaulted. That's contrary to the Criminal Code of Canada. You're going to get arrested for assault. Doesn't matter what the motivation is, as long as somebody's going to complain and notify the police. Was it hate motivated? That becomes part of the investigation. And that, quite often the person that did it will actually cough up the reasons they did it. For whatever reason, they hate this or they hate that. Or it might have been words that were said prior to the physical assault or the threat. Don't forget, you don't have to be assaulted physically to commit, to be the victim of an assault. As long as you think that person is going to follow through with that threat or punch you, then it becomes an assault. And that's very, very different than what we read online. And we've got to be careful about what people post online in terms of differentiating between opinion, whether we like it or not, or whether they're crossing the boundaries of the criminal code, and in which case there's a police investigation. So they are very different, and quite often the two of them are combined. People get assaulted, and they, there are anti-Semitic comments that are made before and after the assault. Being Hasidic and walking down the street in Toronto with a black hat on may be the motivation to get punched in the head for no other reason than that. And that I would suggest is a hate crime as well.
I want to pivot to a little bit thinking about how we should be addressing things differently if we want to be in a more ideal world, right? Hatred is not going away anytime soon. So, maybe we should be taking a more responsible approach to these reports. So first, how should citizens react when they think that they're the victims of a hate crime, right? How do we get it to the point where maybe members of the Jewish community should be reporting a little less and other communities should be reporting more? How do we move that forward, right? As a former police officer, how do you get the community to, be less fearful? And how do you get other communities to sort of say, hey, chill out a bit, right? Go maybe report this to the synagogue or to CJA or to B'nai B'rith, but record the thing, but, let's be responsible.
I think the first thing is education. I think that, people need to know what their rights are, what is a crime, what isn't a crime. I mean, in the 80s, my partner and I visited synagogues right across this country and in the United States talking about hate crime and neo-Nazi groups and white supremacists and things of that nature. And a lot of people didn't know what the laws were and how it would impact on them. And as I said earlier on, we have a very organized community within this country in terms of access to getting information. So a lot of it is education, not just education for members of the Jewish community who may feel they've been assaulted, education to the police, education to the media, and education to the general public as well. And that's being done. I think it's in good shape in the Jewish community. It may not be in such good shape in a lot of the other communities in this country. And that's all about education. And that takes time. That takes years to instill that kind of information and for people to know where they can go if they feel they've been wronged, and having the avenues and also having the processes in place to deal with it, like we do with CJ and with B'nai B'rith and other organizations as well.
And what is the responsibility of the media in these types of reportings? What is the responsibility of the media itself in reporting, in reporting these reports better? Basically, what is their responsibility?
Well, I think they have to understand the laws. I think they have to report these things when it comes to their attention. I think they have to go a little bit further than just interviewing the victim and getting to sort of that emotional response and then taking a 3 second video shot of the swastika on the side of the synagogue. I think they need to go further. They're part of the educational process. They're part of teaching. So I think you know I like to see them go more into the community organizations, to be able to show the general public how this deeply affects not just that particular victim, but everybody in that community. And it doesn't have to be just the Jewish community. It should be affecting all kinds of organizations within that community, mosques, Buddhist temples, you name it. Go on and on and on. It's all about teaching and education. And the people that are committing these crimes and they're producing this material and sending it out there and online, they know that their followers can go to them to get the answers to all the bizarre questions that they may have, that just solidify the thoughts that they have in my mind, that the Jews run the media, the Jews run the country, and on and on and on. And the Holocaust didn't happen and only 90 people died. And, you can go on. It's all about teaching and education. And it's an ongoing process, but we have to have the patience to do it. But at least certainly in the Jewish community in Canada, and from what I've seen in the States, it's far more organized, and there are far more routes people can go to get the answers to the questions they have.
So as a sort of way to wrap this up, and again, to focus back on the Jewish community, there's a quote that I found. I was researching all these headlines from the CJN, right? And I went all the way back to 2015, and the report from 2015 on that the police find the Jews most targeted for hate crimes, right? And we had a quote here from Len Rudner, right, who was the director of community relations for CJA at the time. And he says, we have to pay attention to these things, but we can't let them define us. There's more to being a Jew in Toronto than being the victim of hate crimes. And I think that at the core, right, the 7 years that has shifted between then and now seems to speak volumes in terms of how many people, maybe it's our fault as media, maybe it's the fault of organizations that report these, but we've gotten to the point where as a community, so many people just end up being defined by the fact, as he said, right, in the opposite of that there isn't more to being a Jew in Toronto than being the victim of a hate crime. Is there a way to move beyond that? Is there a way to create some sort of a space for community to be a community? And it's not just the Jewish community. I'm using this as an example because, this is a Jewish show and, we're talking about the Jewish community in general. But to go beyond that and to sort of say, don't let yourself be defined by that. Don't always be hyper vigilant for any moment where you might be the victim of something. How do we move forward, and how do we maybe as the media cool the jets of the community moving forward to sort of say, hey guys, there's more to being a Jew in Toronto than being the victim of a hate crime?
Well, it's true. There is more to being a Jew in Toronto. There's no question about it. But I mean, every time people get comfortable, something happens, right? Somebody gets beaten up. There's an assault. There's another spray painting situation, or windows broken, or a break and enter at a synagogue, things of that nature. And it brings everything back up to the top again, and everything percolates. And then it takes a couple of weeks or months, and things settle down again. And I don't know how you cool it off. I think people have to have their wits about them. I mean, you look at synagogues in this city. We've been having police officers during the high holidays at synagogues in Toronto for as long as I can remember. Okay, and it's only now that mosques and other religious temples are following suit. It's because we have always been proactive and always done that. And we got people trained in the synagogues in terms of crisis intervention and what to do and things of that nature. So other religions and other religious institutions are behind us, and they're catching up, and they're using the Jewish community as an example of what to do, not to be hyper vigilant. You can't live with your head on a swivel, and you can't live always thinking that the person next to you is an anti-Semite or a neo-Nazi or a white supremacist. But I think in a big city, you do have to have your wits about you. And I think that it's unfortunate, but there are a lot of people out there who still view the Jewish community as the source of all evil, and that's not going to change overnight. And we're going to have to live with that. you got to put some faith in human nature and some faith in the public. And I think it's important to always be vigilant.
Mark Mendelson, thank you for joining us.
Have a good day.
You can find links to the stories we talked about in the show notes. And as always, we would love to hear your thoughts on the topic. Email us at bonjour@thecjn.ca. Let us know what you thought.
Jake Epstein is a Canadian actor and singer, probably best known for his work on Degrassi, The Next Generation, playing Craig Manning. I, for one, was a fan. But he also performed on Broadway in the Carole King musical and is now returning to the Toronto stage with a new show, Boy Falls from the Sky, which opens at the Royal Alex Theatre in Toronto April 19th and runs until May 29th. Jake, welcome.
David, thank you so much. Thank you for being a fan of my character on Degrassi.
Oh, of course. That was like my whole teenage childhood experience.
Right, was it? I feel like I played a kind of an antagonist character. I feel like some people were like, you were on Degrassi. We hated you. So I appreciate it.
No, I think I love the moody nature of it all. It struck a chord.
The very
struck a chord
angst
with
of
me.
the day. Yeah, they straightened my hair and pulled it over my eye. It was, super angsty.
It was definitely my go-to
Which
show.
was very, how are you, man? It's been a while.
It's been like at least 10 years since we last did a show together, right? At the Seagull Theater.
Yeah, it's crazy. How have you been? I haven't spoken to you since all the craziness of the last few years. Are you okay? I feel like every interview we just need to be like, are we okay?
It's a true question. And you know what? Like, I don't really talk about it too much, but like with COVID, it's been really great for me just because I allowed, as an artist, you both know, like sometimes we're running around and we're doing 3 or 4 different jobs and we're just burnt out. So many artists I speak to just say, I've just been so burnt out lately. And I think what the pandemic allowed at least me to do, I don't know about you, but at least allowed me time to breathe, refresh, and write. So I've been doing a lot of writing over the past 2 years.
Yeah.
I've been very grateful.
Yeah, that's awesome. You're right. That is the silver lining in all this, is the pause that came with all of it, that kind of reset button. And you're right, the opportunity to look inward, to do some writing, and you're doing this podcast, which is excellent.
Yeah, so I joined in November. I joined on this podcast through the CJN.
Congrats! What a great thing. Yeah,
it's been really fun, and it's great to meet new people and talk to old friends like you. So I guess what I'm just curious about is, we talked about the pandemic, but how does it feel to be back on the stage when theater has been closed for so long? Like, you've delayed this show now twice.
I don't know how I'm gonna react when we do our first show. It's gonna be emotional. I mean, I will say one of the things that I've been really lucky with during the pandemic is having this show to develop. And that's kind of been my thing, is that despite lockdowns, I developed the show online, or I went and I did it. I did a run in Bobcaygeon, Ontario, behind a clear vinyl curtain, which kind of looked like a shower curtain, because that was the mandate at the time, is that there had to be a curtain between the performer and the audience. But I pushed ahead and I kept developing the show, and so knowing that eventually I would get to do it, hopefully. So it's been the total thrill, joy of my life to get to work on this thing. It's the most personal thing I've ever done in my life. It was a huge risk when I first wrote it, and this is beyond. Now I'm gearing up for a run at the Royal Alex Theatre in Toronto. It's hilarious to me how life sometimes works out. I'm very excited. I'm very excited to be back on stage in a major theater in my hometown. It's really beyond what I thought was possible.
Well, you mentioned it's a quite personal story. So can you tell us what Boy Falls from the Sky is about then?
Sure. Well, when I was a kid, my dream was to be a Broadway performer, and I was obsessed. And every summer, my parents would drive my sister and I to New York to see a Broadway show. That was our family vacation. And on the ride down, we would imitate all the voices from Broadway cast albums we'd listen to. We'd annoy the crap out of my parents. And so the show is about my adult pursuit of my childhood dream of trying to be a Broadway performer. And it's sort of about negotiating the realities of going after your childhood dream as an adult. It really pulls back the curtain of the reality of show business. It shines a spotlight on the things that people don't really talk about in show business. And my personal story of performing on Broadway, and I don't think it's a spoiler alert because it's like in my bio, but I originated a leading role in Beautiful, the Carole King musical. And it was on paper, it was a dream come true. And I've had this very charmed career, but in reality, there was a lot of complicated stuff, a lot of reality, a lot of growing up that was going on behind the scenes that I never told anyone. And when I eventually moved home from New York, I stopped singing. And anyone that asked me about my time on Broadway, I would just say it was great because I didn't want to disappoint anyone. And eventually, I started opening up about the reality of my stories, of about my experience in show business, and people started laughing. Like the stories were funny and relatable, and that sort of encouraged me to write them down, and that became a cabaret, and then slowly it's been developed over the last few years into this show called Boy Falls from the Sky.
What was going on then underneath the surface where you just were, you were just saying to people, oh, it's going great, I'm on Broadway, it's everything one expects it to be? What was really happening then to Jake?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I don't want to go into too much because I want people to come see the show, but I'll tell you, this isn't part of the show, but I made my Broadway debut playing Spider-Man in Spider-Man the Musical, which some people will know is probably the most infamous show on Broadway. It was like a punchline on
so many injuries going on.
Yeah, in fact, if memory serves, I was doing a Ross Petty panto at the time, which was a Toronto tradition, and they would joke about things happening in the world, and there were Spider-Man jokes in the panto in Toronto. Like that's how famous this infamous this show was. So I get cast as Spider-Man, and I was very lucky because I didn't hurt myself in a serious way, but I did sprain both of my ankles and my right wrist. And again, I never told anyone about that. But what I used to do is I would wrap my body in like gauze and in sports tape, and I would take painkillers, and then I would put on my Spider-Man tights, and I'd go out as Spider-Man on Broadway, and people would see that iconic, heroic thing, and I'd sign autographs at the stage door, and I was living my dream, and I'd literally come off stage, and I was like in so much pain underneath all that. Yeah, so
you
that's
had the idea of like the show must go on constantly and just put on a brave face.
I think I was so I felt like I was so lucky that what right did I have to tell anyone about how I was struggling at the time. And I also had created a bit of a narrative that I loved, which was that this local Toronto boy was like killing it on Broadway, which wasn't really true. I mean, it was, but I didn't want to tarnish that. And I had this complicated answer when people would ask me what was it like on Broadway, and I decided instead of lying or instead of struggling with this answer that I would explain it in a show. And that's kind of the joy of theater, right? Is that you get to turn moments of pain and struggle into like theatrical moments of comedy and joy, and that kind of alchemy is really a thrill to get to do.
So when you were going through this, all the pain and the frustrations, were you ever thinking in that moment, man, this might make a good show one day? Because sometimes as artists, when we go through the crap, when we go through problems in our life, we say, oh, this could be a show.
Right. That's funny. My wife sometimes, if one of us is emotional, we'll be emotional, then we'll be like, this would be a great close-up right now. Actors are so messed up. No, I didn't. I never thought this would make a great show one day. The farthest thing, I was like, I hope no one, I'm going to just bury all this because firstly, no one wants to hear it. And secondly, I don't want to like tarnish it. I just wanted to keep going. And then I it all kind of blew up for me in New York. And it was this, the reason that it kind of came out of me is that I keep talking about my partner, my wife, Vanessa Smythe. She's an actress as well. And she used to host this storytelling night at Streetcar Crow's Nest in the East End of Toronto. It was called The Spoke. And every week there was a weekly topic, and she would tell a story, and she'd get actors and some non-actors, and people would go up and tell a story from their lives, a real story. That was the one rule, is that it had to be true. And I used to go watch her every week and watch these stories, and I fell in love with storytelling. I fell in love with the power of someone with a microphone standing in front of people telling a story. And it was immediately so funny and so relatable. And Vanessa asked me one week to go up and tell a story, and I did. And I just found it so relieving to get to talk about truth in front of people. And it's not even like I told us a story that became a story of my show. I told a different story, but I just love storytelling, and I was getting asked to perform my act once I'd finished doing Broadway, and I didn't have an act, and then my wife was like, write these down, write these stories down, and talk about them, and make them fun and funny, and see what happens. And what came out of me was all of this stuff that I had just been kind of hiding for a really long time.
Yeah, no, I think I feel quite similarly. Sometimes like those stories that are true, that really come from the heart, are so much more exciting to watch than someone pretending to be something and mimicking something. When you really hear it from the core, your heart breaks. You're excited. You're engaged more than any. And like Montreal, they had real life storytelling. Toronto, across the country, they do these things, and it's a very exciting, engaging thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a reason we're all into reality TV and podcasts, and there's documentaries. Like there is nothing like the truth, like the power of the truth. There's nothing funnier than the truth. There's nothing sadder than the truth. That being said, I have a responsibility as a storyteller when I'm there on stage. So, it isn't a documentary. I have shaped the stories to be comical. I mean, it's a piece of comedy. It's a piece of entertainment first, especially during like this COVID time. I just feel like if you're going to get people to come out to the theater, which is a really big deal right now, it's a lot of work to get to the theater, and you've got to wear a mask and all of it, then it's got to be a great time. So I have, with the help of my director and my collaborator, Robert McQueen, we've shaped my reality into a piece of theater.
And it's not the first time you've done something like that, where you're taking a story that may not be your own, but it's a real story. You've collaborated with your mother in the past to write about your grandfather and what their experience was like in the Holocaust too. So this type of collaboration from real life stories.
Right. So it's a great point. It actually wasn't about my grandfather. It was a story that we had made up, but you're right. I did write a play with my mom, who's an author of novels and Holocaust books for young readers. And we wrote a play together that was produced at the Harold Green Jewish Theater. Yeah, I mean, but it's true. I mean, as an actor, as you know, you're always looking to make it seem like it's your own story. I mean, I feel like I'm a really bad liar, and like as an actor, I'm like, no, I'm not trying to trick people. I want to find what about the character is actually real, what is relatable to myself. And so for sure, you're always that muscle is always going, but. Like this, I'm terrified, man. This is like a whole other level. This is a lot of real. It's a lot of real on stage. I just think people, it's relieving right now to hear people talk about their truth in an honest way, in a funny way, in a way that's not like, oh, woe is me or pity me. In a way that's comforting right now. I mean, I feel like people need some comfort right now.
Yeah. I do hear you. I want to switch gears slightly, just because this is a conversation we brought up on the past on this podcast in terms of, the Hallmark movies. You've been on a couple of.
I listened to the episode.
Oh, did
by the
you?
way.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, of course I did.
So then I'm sure you have
did.
thoughts and opinions on the things that we brought up. We talked about mistletoe and menorahs. You were on. We really
Right.
talked about the idea of what these Jewish parts and these Jewish storylines meant for Hallmark, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I wish I had listened to that episode again as like research for this, because I was like, I bet you that's gonna come up. So I'm just a little bit in this moment, if I'm being honest with you. I'm having a hard time just remembering all of the points that you brought up.
Fair. I think our whole question was, is this Hallmark industry movie what they've done year after year about about this type of Christmas, very sweet,
right? Like, is it
thing?
Appropriate?
Is it appropriate?
Is it like really just Christmas and then you slap a Star of David on it, kind of thing?
Exactly. Like, does our background, our culture as Jews, does it fit into it? And I'm just curious how you felt as a Jew with the parts, whether you felt they were appropriate, whether you felt they were tokenism at all, and what you thought about the storylines.
It's a great question. How do I feel about it? So there's two answers I have. One of them is the actor answer, which is that as an actor looking for work, you're gonna do a lot of things, right?
Yeah, sure.
Like, you're gonna do a lot of things. I was lucky enough to shoot a Christmas movie during the pandemic when I didn't even think film was ever going to be possible again. I was thrilled to shoot that gig. Am I super proud of the movie? I wouldn't say that I am, but I'm very grateful to have the work as an actor. I knew how lucky I was. When I got asked to do Mistletoe and Menorahs, it was like one of the first Jewish stories that it was a risk for Lifetime. And I remember what I really appreciated about it was that it was the story of a Jewish guy who meets a non-Jewish woman. My wife is not Jewish, and I remember having to learn about Christmas. I remember going to my first Christmas with her family, and she had to kind of tell me, like, I felt like an idiot, but I was like, I don't know what this is. I've never celebrated Christmas before. Now, of course, I knew what Christmas was. It wasn't So we did this movie. So there was an element, you talk about truth. There was an element of truth that I really appreciated with the movie. Now, that being said, how do I put this in a way that's not to bash the movie? Because I'm also proud of the movie. But, the audience wasn't Jews. The audience were Christians in the Midwest who had probably never heard of, a lot of these traditions before. So a lot of it was like the story of Hanukkah, and so, yes, it was, a Jewish person hearing that would be like, obviously, like, of course. So it was not perfect, but I was also proud. I was like, if there's going to be a movie, a Hanukkah movie, I'm going to star in it. Like, why shouldn't I star in it? And then I recently did my second. It was a Hallmark movie that aired called 8 Days of Hanukkah or 8 Days of Love. I can't remember what the final title was. Which was a Hanukkah story, and had a Jewish producer and had an entirely Jewish cast. Was it a perfect Jewish movie? No, there was a lot of it that I found a little bit cringeworthy. There was I kept thinking like there was a Hanukkah hunt, which was like an Easter hunt. I was like, the Hanukkah hunt is not a thing. But I also recognized that this was how they were going to be able to sell the movie to the Midwest America, was to have some relatable things. So I felt like we pushed the needle a little bit more. And my guess is that if I'm lucky enough to get to do another movie, and who knows in this industry if I ever will again, I'm hoping that I'll be able to push the needle even more into kind of that authenticity. And I'm certainly always there sort of fighting to keep these movies as authentic as possible, while, the Hallmark executives are on set saying, well, we need to make sure whatever they need to do to sell a movie. So it is a balance.
Right. So when I was just sitting down and I was watching Mistletoe Menorahs with my partner who is not Jewish either, and we did find commonality. I think we did find a movie that could really bring both of our faiths and cultures together. So I think we really appreciated everything that was being delivered. And well, as you say, maybe it's not perfect and you're going to try to push the needle a bit later on. I think there was elements that we could really take and be proud of.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll agree with you there. I feel like as the first time Lifetime had ever done any kind of Jewish movie or a Hanukkah movie, this felt like the a pretty good first step. And again, I was certainly proud. I'm proud of my culture, so I'm always, the December becomes so inundated with Christmas. So why shouldn't there be other cultures as well? Of course, like the argument is Hanukkah isn't an important holiday, right? It's a minor holiday. There should be the Pesach movie. Absolutely.
Jake, you are going to go to Hallmark soon and you are going to pitch them a story about Passover and the relevance for the Jews.
You're right. I'm going to write that. 100%. 100%. Yeah, you'll be in it too, of course.
Oh, thank you.
We'll get all the Jews, all the Canadian Jews we know. We'll round up and we'll put on a movie. Yeah, it's interesting. Like when you get the chance to work on a movie and you know what goes into it, which is not just the writing. There is a whole kitchen of cooks, if you will, who have an opinion. And but yeah, like you said, I'm super grateful to be in those movies. They're really fun to shoot. They're really joyful. They can be silly, but I know they make a lot of people happy.
Great. Well, Jake, I want to thank you so much for coming on. And where can people get tickets for your show?
You can go to mervish.com and get tickets for Boy Falls from the Sky. It's playing April 19th to May 29th at the Royal Alex Theatre in Toronto.
Jake, great seeing you.
You too, man. Yeah, all the best.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
So last time we were talking about the portion of the week, David, you had left us on a cliffhanger of a question. What was that question?
I was desperate to know how I can prove that I am a Kohen.
So interestingly enough, with the rise of DNA tracing and DNA availability of DNA, what do we call it when you check your DNA or sequencing and all of, the home availability of 23andMe and all of, these things. In the 90s, they started doing research around the DNA of Kohanim, because if the Kohen gene only goes, the Kohen idea, the idea of the Kohen is patrilineal. It goes from father to son to father to son to son, whatever. Then you should be able to look on the Y chromosome, which is the chromosome that is male, and or that gives us the male type if you are of the male gender. We generally deal with the Y chromosome, and they actually started looking for markers and for a common ancestor of of Kohanim. And there is this thing now called Y chromosomal Aaron. And Y chromosomal Aaron, I'm reading from Wikipedia here, is the name given to the hypothesized most recent common ancestor of the patrilineal Jewish priestly caste known as the Kohanim. According to the traditional understanding of the Hebrew Bible, this ancestor was Aaron, the brother of Moses. So they were looking to trace whether or not you can find one individual from which all Kohanim would descend, and you'd be able to do that with DNA. And in theory, they thought that they found somebody, and I'm not like an expert on this, but I'll just read a little bit more from that while some early genetic studies were seen as possibly supporting the traditional biblical narrative, this view was subsequently challenged, with some researchers arguing that the genetic evidence refutes the idea of a single founder for Jewish Kohanim who lived in biblical times. But there are recent studies that have provided further support for the model of descent from a common ancestor who lived in the First Temple period by demonstrating that Kohanim from different Jewish communities form a tight cluster which is specific to the Jewish Kohens. So the idea being that if you are a Kohen from Eastern Europe and there is a Kohen from Yemen, they should be able to find a common ancestor, and that would generally be really rare. and again, I'm not a geneticist, so somebody maybe will come on and help us with a little bit more of this. But there is DNA evidence that there is tighter clusters of people that are Kohanim that have certain markers on their genes for that, common ancestry.
But you said it all comes right through the male line. So if hypothetically it was my grandmother who was a Kohen, does that mean that I am like null and void? Does it get passed on to me?
It does not. That is correct, right? So my children, for example, have a mother who is from a Kohen gene, but not myself, and therefore they technically. But because this Kohen marker is on the Y chromosome, it wouldn't be carried through.
So then, breaking news right now: David Sklar cannot be classified as a Kohen if it comes from my bubby Dorothy.
There you go. So we can get into what that means and why we are, Kohanim, and how that works in terms of the trust and how we carry. Because if you carry this marker, that doesn't automatically make you a Kohen, and if you are missing the marker, it doesn't automatically disqualify you from a Kohen. But it is based on the hereditary proof, meaning somebody whose father tells them that they are a Kohen, that person knew because their father told them they were a Kohen, is generally the interesting, connection of how we get to Kohanim. But your father told you that you were a Kohen.
My father lied to me.
Based on the fact that his mother was a Kohen.
Yes, he's been lying to me my entire life.
Well, what we should do is really talk more about, and we can save this for another time, or for another week, the liberal approach to Kohanim and how it differs from the Orthodox approach, and how in the conservative movement and the Reform movement, Kohanim and the Kohen ideas are very, very, are used very differently.
No, I'm sticking with my story of my father's been lying to me my entire life and denied me access to all the glorious things of attending the ceremonies for the funerals that I couldn't go to and couldn't do it. So it's fine.
Listen,
I'll have a word with my father later this week. It's okay.
Whatever you need to get your method acting crying, like get through that place of getting
Daddy,
to weep.
Why'd you lie to me, Daddy?
Use it. But what I found interesting and why I thought about the DNA this week was, it's much more of a medical oriented or biological or thought way of thinking about Kohanim and the Kehuna, right, in terms of ancestry. And there's really something interesting about this week's Torah portion in which the Kohen doesn't just have a job of being the person getting all these portions of food and doing the work in the temple, right, which we spoke about last week also. But they have this really interesting job based on this week and next week's Torah portion, which is to identify the tzara'at, which we now people used to translate as leprosy, or these skin lesions, which would render somebody ritually impure. And it was the job of the Kohen basically to be the dermatologist of the entire Jewish people and if you had a problem and you would be able to go and look, the Kohen would be the one to determine whether or not you were ritually impure or ritually pure. And that's what this whole portion is talking about. And it's really fascinating to talk, the Talmud talks about why we get into ritual impurities and things like that and where it comes from and what's the reasoning behind it. But the portion doesn't get into it at all. But I just found something really interesting about the Kohanim not just being the people taking care of the sacrifices and the elevated ritual, but it's also dealing with these blemishes on your skin and whether or not you're pure or not, because you might be impure. And I actually found there's an interesting midrash, right, an interesting teaching of the early rabbis that talk about what's going on with this and why the Kohanim are the ones that are actually responsible for doing this, right? Because you would think that it's not quite priestly to go around and look at skin lesions and discolorations and stuff like that. No, I don't know. Like, if you were a Kohen, would you train?
No, I've always wanted to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So there's actually something really interesting that says that when Moses heard that his brother was going to be the one, and his brothers and his nephews were going to be the ones to check this stuff out, he goes to God and he asks God, right? Like, this is like kind of gross. Like, why are you doing this? Right. Is this really is this befitting Aaron's position to go look at skin lesions and stuff like that? And God responds and says, well, he gets all of these priestly gifts, he should be able to work for it. And there's another midrash that I found that is even more interesting and says it in even more sharper language, that says, that as much as they receive the gifts, right, all of these truma and all of the and see the Jews, right, and at the highest moments of their life, right, when they go and offer sacrifices and elevated in moments of worship, they should see people and they're in their troubled times, right, in times when they might be impure, and so that they don't always think about the rabbi or the priest as somebody who you just go to when things are going great, but you should be able to go when things are going not so great either.
So basically, what I'm getting from this is that Jewish mothers were always right, that they always wanted their children to be dermatologists because it is truly the higher calling and the best position you could possibly have. This is what I'm hearing from you.
Yes, absolutely. I used to say, though, that the worst type of Jewish doctor to be as a Jew was a dermatologist, simply because, and you've seen this in shul at like Kiddush, right? People come up to you, not you, but like if you're a dermatologist and they, listen, I know I should make an appointment. I know I got to make an appointment. I'm going to come to the office, but just do me a favor. Can you look at this? I think it might be something. Can you just have a look quickly? And I know I'll make an appointment. Don't worry. And it's like, you don't want to be that guy who's like the dermatologist, because you can't do that. If instead you should be like an epidemiologist, because nobody comes up to you and says like, I think I have Ebola, or, it might be hantavirus. I'm not sure, but maybe I know I should make an appointment. Nobody tells you that at Kiddush, except for the past 2 years, right? That's what happens in shul if you're an epidemiologist, is that everybody comes up to you and says, listen, tell me your take on COVID. I mean, really, is this a thing? Is this not a thing? So maybe dermatologist is actually the better, career.
I would say so. I would absolutely agree.
On that note, now's the time in our show where we like to talk about the nachas of the week, the things that have been making us feel good about something good and Jewish, something over the past week. Alana, what's your nachas of the week?
My nachas of the week is also related to the Mile End. My boyfriend came down with me to stay in Montreal for the course of my rehearsal period, and I've gotten him addicted to Montreal bagels, and I'm very proud of myself because he's a Torontonian. He's like fourth generation Torontonian, and for the longest time I was like, you have to try Montreal bagel. It's nothing like you've ever tasted. And he was like, I don't really see how that could be. And then we are staying really close to St. Viator, and we went and got a hot bagel right off of the thing, and his life has changed. He's been back like 1,000 times. And then yesterday he wanted me to add this because I told him I was going to use this for my nachas. He went to Fairmount so that he could compare, and he has to go back a few more times to have a fair comparison. But so far, his take is that he likes the taste better of the bagels at St. Viator, but he likes the texture better at Fairmount. And we'll see what happens. I'll keep you posted.
Alana, what type of Jew is your boyfriend who has never had a Montreal bagel, who is from Toronto and could have easily taken the bus, the train, the car, or even at a store picked it up, who has never tried a Montreal bagel? What is wrong with this? We need to meet him. What is wrong with him?
There's so many Jews that I've met in Toronto who literally like don't know what a Montreal bagel is, and it blows my mind.
How is that okay, Toronto listeners, how have you never tried a Montreal bagel in your life?
So sad.
This is wounding.
Like, it's possible that he's been to Montreal a couple times. Maybe he tried it a few years ago, but like clearly not fresh and like right off the thing. So, Torontonians like to think that they're in like the center of the universe, and so Montreal bagel, that's too far, We got to teach them the way of the real bagel.
Alana, are you team St. Viator or team Fairmount?
To be honest, I haven't had a Fairmount bagel in a really long time. I kind of just like went on the St. Viator train and then just was like, that's the bagel. So I don't know.
So if he chooses ultimately like team Fairmount, is it like a deal breaker? Is it over?
It's not over. I think my family prefers St. Viator, so I was like, that's why I showed it to him first. But, he's entitled. Like, there are wars people start about this, and it's pretty divided.
I hear that.
So we'll see what happens.
David, what's your nachas?
Alana asked earlier about the Oscars and was there any Jewish-related stuff? Well, Alana, here is my nachas. So I want to give a shout-out to Marlee Matlin, who is in the new movie Coda. The Coda won for Best Film and for Best Male Actor. And if people don't know who Marlee Matlin is, she's a wonderful actor. In 1987, she won for Best Actress for Children of a Lesser God. But what people might not know about is she is hilarious. She has done roasts for Comedy Central in the past, and I think she could kick Chris Rock's comedic butt any day of the week.
All right.
What's yours?
I didn't have a lot of stuff go across my radar this week until late this afternoon. I opened up my Apple Music, and a new single popped up by one of my absolute favorite Jewish artists, Ishai Rebo. I'm sure you've heard me talk about him in the past, and it's just a single, but like it really put a pop in my step the rest of the day. It's called Lo Nafsik Lachlom, right? We do not stop dreaming. It's a wonderful song. Go check it out. A new single by a great artist is always a good thing in my books. So Ishai Rebo, thank you for making my day and adding to my nachas of the week.
Thanks for putting a pop in Avi's step.
Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for the week of April 1st, Shabbat Rosh Chodesh, Parshat Tazria. Our producer is Michael Freeman, technical production by Andre Goulet. Our music is by So Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please do leave a comment and rating on the platform of your choice, and as always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca. I'm Avi Feingold.
I'm Ilana Zakon.
And I'm David Sklar.